Mayday, mayday, crocodile in the water. Alan's down. Repeat, Alan Shaw is down. Send everything you have to Sunset Lagoon. Now, the radio crackled with static, then fell silent. What began as another perfect summer day at one of the most beautiful swimming spots in coastal America ended in unimaginable horror. This is the story of Alan Shaw, a beloved lifeguard whose final moments would shake a community to its core. His death world revealed the deadly predator that had been silently stalking paradise. The crystal-clear waters of Sunset Lagoon had always been a sanctuary. Families came from hundreds of miles away to swim in its pristine depths. They came to feel safe under the watchful eye of their guardian. But on that terrifying afternoon, safety became an illusion, and Paradise revealed its darkest secret. Now, let's uncover what really happened to Alan Shaw. Chapter 1: The Guardian of Sunset Lagoon. Alan Shaw was 28 years old. When he died, he had already saved 37 lives in his 5 years as head lifeguard at Sunset Lagoon. Born in the coastal town of Cedar Bay, Alan grew up with salt water in his veins. He had an unshakable dream of protecting people in Thwarter. His mother, Rebecca Shaw, still remembers the day her 5-year-old he was going to be a lifeguard. He said it so matter-of-factly. Shercall's tears still fresh in her eyes. Years later, he said, "Mummy, I'm going to save people in the water. I thought it was just a phase." But Alan meant every word. After earning his marine biology degree, he chose Sunset Lagoon over laboratory work or government positions. He chose to be exactly what he had always dreamed of being. He chose to be a guardian of the water. Sunset Lagoon, just any swimming spot nestled between towering limestone cliffs and fed by underground springs. The lagoon boasted water so clear you could see 30 feet to the bottom. Tourists called it paradise. But Alan saw responsibility and knew every rock, every current, every dangerous spot in that lagoon, says his longtime friend and fellow lifeguard Marcus Thompson. He had this sixth sense about trouble. He could spot a struggling swimmer from a 4-mile away. The rescued swimmers ranged from toddlers who had wandered too deep to elderly Twashu, had overestimated their swimming abilities. Each rescue was different, but Alan's approach never changed. He was calm, efficient, and utterly fearless. When lives were at stake, Alan's daily varied. He arrived at dawn to conduct his safety sweep. He would swim the entire perimeter and check for new hazards. His equipment checks were legendary among the staff. Every piece of rescue gear was inspected, tested, and positioned exactly where it needed to be. But in the weeks leading up to that horrible day, something had been bothering Alan. His mother noticed at first during their weekly phone calls. He seemed distracted, worried about something he couldn't quite articulate. He kept saying the water felt different. Rebecca Shaw recalls her said something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what. The lagoon's other staff members had noticed Celestio. Alan was scanning the water more frequently. He was staying later each evening to do additional safety sweeps. Had started carrying his radio even when he was off duty. Looking back, I think he sensed something. Marcus Thompson reflects, Alan had spent so much time in that water. I think he could feel when something was off. Maybe he knew danger was coming. What none of them knew was that their guardian was being watched beneath the crystal clear surface of paradise. Ancient eyes had been studying the patterns. They were learning the routines, waiting for their perfect moment to strike. Chapter 2: Shadows beneath paradise. Sunset Lagoon had always been a place where families felt safe, but what visitors didn't know was that the lagoon connected to a vast work of underground caves and channels. These hidden waterways created a perfect highway for marine life. Totrevel, unseen local fishing guide Captain Ray Hutchkins had been working these waters for 40 years. In recent months, he had noticed troubling changes. The fish patterns were all wrong. Hutchins explained species that normally stay in deep water were showing up in the shallows. Most disturbing was what wasn't there anymore. The lagoon's resident population of small sharks and rays had suddenly disappeared when the locals clear out. Hutchins says grimly that usually means something bigger has moved, in that something bigger was a massive saltwater crocodile. It was later measured at 16 feet and weighing nearly 2,000 pounds. The ancient predator had been displaced when coastal development destroyed its traditional hunting grounds 20 m to the south. Marine biologist Elena Rodriguez believes the crocodile had been living in the lagoon's cave system for at least 6 weeks before the tragedy. Crocodiles are incredibly patient hunters. Rodriguez explains this animal would have spent weeks studying the patterns of the lagoon. It was learning when people were most vulnerable. The signs were there, but they were subtle. Local pet owners had reported 3 missing dogs in the month before the attack. Birdwatchers noticed that heron and egrets had stopped coming to the shallow areas. Most telling of all, the lagoon's famous sea turtle population had vanished completely. Maria Santos, who worked at the lagoon snack bar for 15 years, remembers the changes. The water just felt differential. Says the fish weren't jumping like they used to. The water birds got nervous. Regular visitors started commenting that something felt off. The most chilling sign came 3 days before the attack. Local fisherman Robert Chen saw what he thought was a fallen log floating near the surface. As he watched, its log moved against the current. "I've lived here my whole life," Chen recalls. "I know the difference between a log and an alligator, but this was bigger than any alligator I'd ever seen." I called the wildlife office, but without a photo, there wasn't much they could do. The crocodile had chosen its territory with deadly precision. The lagoon's layout provided perfect hunting conditions. There were deep channels for hiding and shallow areas where prey would be vulnerable. The underground cave system offered multiple escape routes. Local marine photographer Jake Williams discovered something horrifying when reviewing his underwater footage. In several shots, barely visible in the background, was a massive shadow that shouldn't have been there. "I've gone through every frame," Williams says, his voice shaking. "That thing was there for weeks. Watching, learning, it was hunting us, and we had no idea." The crocodile Sprassen explained other mysterious incidents. Several swimmers reported feeling something large brush past them underwater. One tourist swore he saw a massive shape moving beneath his kayaker's companions. Convinced him he was imagining things. As the investigation would later reveal, the crocodile had been gradually becoming bolder. It was moving from deep channels into shallow areas where swimmers gathered. Its attacks on local pets were practice runs. They were tests of its ability to strike and retreat undetected. The lagoon that families had trusted had become something else entirely. It had become a trap, and Alan Shaw was about to become its most tragic victim. Chapter 3: The Perfect Storm. July 15th. Donald, absolutely perfect for swimming. The morning sun painted Sunset Lagoon in shades of gold and turquoise. A gentle breeze kept the temperature comfortable. By 8 o'clock in the morning, families were already spreading blankets on the white sand beach. Alan Shaw arrived at dawn, as always, but something felt different. That morning, his mother would later say, he seemed restless. During their phone call the night before, he was unable to shake a feeling that had been growing stronger for days. He told me he'd been having dreams about the lagoon. Rebecca Shaw remembers bad dreams where something was wrong with the water, but he couldn't tell what. Alan's pre-opening routine was more thorough than usual. That morning he swam the entire perimeter twice. Instead of once, he was diving deeper to check for hazards. His assistant, Sarah Kim, noticed he seemed unusually focused. Alan was always careful, but that morning he was almost obsessive. Kim recalls. He checked every piece of equipment 3 times. He kept scanning the water like he was looking for something specific. The first families arrived at 9 o'clock when the lagoon officially opened. The Rodriguez family from 2 states away had been planning this trip for months. The Johnsons' regular visitors set up their usual spot near the Lifeguard tower, where they could wave to Alan by 10:30. Nearly 200 people were enjoying. The lagoon children built sandcastles, while their parents, relaxed teenagers, showed off their diving skills from the jumping rock. It was exactly the kind of scene that made Sunset Lagoon famous, but beneath their surface, something massive was moving. Through the underwater channels, the crocodile had been more active than usual. Its hunting instincts were triggered by the increasing number of potential prey. Local fishing guide Ray Hutchkins noticed something troubling while setting up his boat. The water near the deep channel seemed to be moving against the current. It was creating subtle swirls that didn't match the wind patterns I'd been reading. Water. My whole life, Hutchkins explains, when water moves wrong, there's always a reason. Something big was down there. Alan had positioned himself on his lifeguard chair by 11 o'clock. He was scanning the water methodically, his radio correct with routine check-ins from other stations. Everything seemed normal, but the feeling of unease wouldn't leave him. The crowd continued to grow as the morning progressed. Tour buses, Araved carrying hotel visitors, local swimming clubs began their weekend training sessions. The lagoon snack bar did steady business as families settled in for a full day. What no one realized was that the crocodile was becoming increasingly aggravated by the unusual activity level the massive predator was accustomed to, explained sonar operator Tom Bradley, but we couldn't tell what was what. For all we knew, we were tracking the crocodilias. It moved Alan through a maze of caves we didn't even know existed. Captain Ray Hutchkins made the first dangerous decision to get closer to the attack site. His shallow draft fishing boat could navigate areas too dangerous for the larger rescue vessels, but it also put him within striking range of the massive predator. I knew Alan personally, Hutchkins explains. I'd worked with him, fished with him, considered him a friend. I wasn't going to sit back and watch while he was down there fighting for his life. Someone had to take the risk. Hutchkins deployed underwater cameras from his boat. He was trying to get visual confirmation of the situation below. What he saw in the dark water filled him with both hope and terror. There were signs of recent disturbance in the channel. There were massive gouges, the sandy bottom that could only have been made by something incredibly large and powerful. The bottom looked like a battlefield, Hutchkins recalls. You could see where something huge had been thrashing around. You could see where Ethad gouged deep marks in the sand and rock, but I couldn't see Alan, couldn't see the crocodile. Everything was too stirred up. Meanwhile, wildlife experts were racing to the scene with specialized equipment for dealing with large predators. Crocodile expert Maria Santos arrived with tranquilizer equipment and protective gear, but she immediately recognized the limitations of their situation. Tantalizing a crocodile this size underwater is virtually impossible. Santos explains the animal has to surface for the drugs to take effect. We had no way to predict when or where that might happen. We were dealing with a predator in its perfectlement. The decision was made to send dive teams into the water. Despite the enormous risks involved, elite rescue divers from the State Marine Unit volunteered for what everyone understood might be a suicide mission. They would search the cave system for any sign of Alan Shaw, while hoping to avoid becoming victims themselves. Those divers showed incredible courage. Turner reflects, they knew they were entering the territory of a massive predator. They were swimming into dark caves where they could be attacked from any direction, but they also knew Alan Shaw might still be alive down there. The dive teams entered the water in pairs connected by safety line sand, equipped with underwater communications gear. Their lights pierced the murky depths as they began exploring the cave system that most people never knew existed. Beneath the peaceful lagoon, what they discovered was a vast network of interconnected chambers and tunnels. Some were large enough to accommodate the massive crocodile, others too small for anything bigger than a fish. The complexity of the system meant the predator could be anywhere. The diverse could easily become lost in the underwater maze. It was like swimming through an alien world, describes Lediver Michael Chen. We found chambers the size of rooms, tunnels that seemed to go on forever. They were all connected beneath the lagoon. If that crocodile had taken Alan into that system, finding them would be like searching for Enadel in a haystack above the surface. Alan's mother, Rebecca Shaw, had evaded the lagoon after receiving the devastating phone call. She stood on the shore watching the rescue efforts. She was surrounded by friends and family who had rushed to support her during the nightmare. I kept thinking he was going to surface, she remembers through tears. Helen was such a strong swimmer, such a fighter. I kept telling myself that if anyone could survive something like this, it would be my son. As the hours passed, the search expanded to include the entire network of channels and springs connected to the lagoon. Boats with Sidecon sonar searched every possible area where the crocodile might have taken its victim. Helicopter crews used thermal imaging equipment to scan for any sign of life in the water, but the crocodile seemed to have vanished as completely as its victim. The massive predator had demonstrated the same ability to disappear that had allowed it to live undetected in the lagoon for weeks. It had become a ghost beneath the water, leaving only blood and terror in its wake. What made this so difficult was that we were dealing with an incredibly intelligent animal, explains wildlife expert Michael Torres. Crocodiles don't just attack randomly. This one had chosen its hunting ground carefully. It had learned the patterns of human activity and executed a perfect ambush. It knew exactly how to use the cave system to its advantage. As darkness began to fall, rescue operation faced a terrible reality. More than 6 hours had passed since the attack. No human could survive that long underwater. The search was no longer a rescue mission, but a recovery operation. Even that might prove impossible if the crocodile had taken Alan deep into the cave system. The families who had come to Sunset Lagoon for a perfect day of swimming watched in as their paradise became the scene of the most intensive search and rescue operation in the area's history. Children who had been laughing and playing that morning now clung to their parents. They were traumatized by witnessing nature's darkest reality. But the search continued through the night. Rescue teams refused to give up hope that somehow, against all odds, Alan Shaw might still be alive somewhere in Thedips. The guardian of Sunset Lagoon deserved nothing less than their complete commitment to bringing him home. Impossible rescue had become a race against time, hope, and the prehistoric predator that had shattered paradise forever. Chapter 6: Searching for Answers. The recovery of Alan Shaw's body came 36 hours after the attack. The massive crocodile finally surfaced in a remote section of the lagoon's cave system. The discovery brought closure to the desperate search, but opened a flood of painful questions. How could such a tragedy have occurred in one of the area's most monitored swimming areas? Wildlife officers working with specialized crocodile handlers managed to tranquilize and capture the 16-feet predator. They used techniques normally reserved for much smaller animals. The operation required multiple boats, a helicopter, and equipment specially flown from crocodile research facilities. Hundreds of miles away, taking down a crocodile this size was unlike anything we'd ever attempted, explains wildlife officer Sandra Martinez. We were dealing with a predator that had lived for decades by avoiding human contact. It knew how to hide, how to hunt, and how to serve. Capturing it alive was essential for understanding what had happened. The autopsy results confirmed everyone's worst fears. Alan Shaw had fought bravely, but had been overwhelmed by the crocodile's size and strength. The attack had been swift and devastating. There was no possibility of survival once the predator entered its death roll. Alan died, doing what he loved, protecting others. His mother, Rebecca Shaw, said at a memorial service attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, "He spent his life as a guardian, and he died as one. I know he would want his death, Tomian, something he would want it to prevent other families from going through this pain." The investigation into how such a massive predator had lived undetected in Sunset Lagoon revealed a troubling series of missed warning signs and bureaucratic failures. The crocodile scientists determined had been living in the lagoon's cave system for at least 2 months before the attack. Analysis of Thenimal's stomach contents provided grim evidence of its activities during those weeks. Remains of local pets' water fowl and fish showed that the crocodile had been actively hunting in the lagoon area long before it attacked Alan Shaw. This animal didn't just wander into the lagoon by accident, explains marine biologist Alina Rodriguez, who led the post-attack investigation. It had established territory, learned the human activity patterns, and was actively hunting in the area. The signs were there, but no one put the pieces together. The investigation uncovered multiple reports of unusual wildlife activity that had been filed but never properly investigated. Robert Chen's sighting of the massive log that moved against the current was just one of several warnings that went unheeded. Pet disappearances in the area had increased by 300%. In Thetpu, months before the attack, local bird populations had shifted their feeding patterns dramatically. Commercial fishermen reported unusual catches and empty nets in areas that had been productive for decades. Every single warning sign was there, says former lagoon manager David Costa, who resigned his position following the investigation. Missing pets, disturbed wildlife patterns, fishermen reporting strange activity. We had all the pieces, but no one put them together into the bigger picture. The most damning evidence came from the lagoon's own security cameras footage. Analysis revealed that the crocodile had been visible in the background of several tourist photos and videos taken weeks before the attack. The massive predator had been lurking just beneath the surface. It was studying its future hunting ground. While families swam nearby, looking at those images is absolutely chilling, explains investigatively Jake Williams. You can see this enormous shadow in the background while children are playing in the foreground. That thing was watching, learning, planning were all potential prey, and we had no idea. The investigation also revealed significant gaps in wildlife monitoring and emergency protocols. The lagoon's management had no procedures for dealing with large predator threats. This was despite being located in an area known for diverse marine life. Communication between different agencies proved to be a critical failure. Wildlife reports were filed, with one department at disappearances were tracked by another lagoon. Safety was managed by a third organization. No single agency had quieter periods when it could hunt without detection. The constant movement was triggering its stress responses. Known, Alan had made his first patrol swim of the day. The water felt unusually warm to him. He noticed the fish seemed more scattered than normal. After completing his swim, he immediately began another systematic scan of the lagoon. Lunch crowd began arriving around 12:30. This brought the total number of people to nearly 400. Children ramboot when the water and their picnic setups. Couples walked hand in hand along the shoreline, but in the deep channel connected to the underground cave system. The crocodile was making its final preparation. Massive predator had identified its target area, where swimmers would be most vulnerable. At 1:45, Alan made the decision that would cost him his life. He announced to Sarah Kim that he was going to conduct an additional patrol swim. I asked him why he was swimming again so soon. Kim remembers he said something just didn't feel right. He wanted to do more check before the afternoon swimming lessons started. Alan tested his radio one final time and slipped into the water at exactly 2:45 p.m. The crystal clear lagoon that had been his second home was about to become the scene of unimaginable horror. Chapter 4: When Paradise turned to horror at 2:47 p.m. on July 15th, the crystal clear waters of Sunset Lagoon became the scene of the most terrifying attack in the area's recorded history. What happened next would be burned into the memories of everyone present. It was a nightmare that transformed Paradise into a place of horror in mere seconds. Alan Shaw had been conducting his additional patrol swim for less than 2 minutes when the Crocodile struck. He was approximately 50 yards from shore. He was swimming in the Channel area, where the underground springs created the lagoon's famous crystal clear visibility. The water was calm, the afternoon sun filtering down through the depths in beautiful shafts of light. Witness accounts of what happened next vary in detail, but are unanimous in their terror. Margaret Phillips, a tourist from Ohio, was photographing her children playing in the shallow area when she noticed something wrong. I was looking through my camera lens when I saw Olin swimming. Phillips recalls her voice, still shaking years later. 1 second he was doing his normal stroke, the next second, something massive came up from underneath him, something huge and darkened, moving incredibly fast. The crocodile's attack was swift and devastating. The 16-foot predator had been laying motionless on the channel bottom. It was perfectly camouflaged among the rocks and shadows. When Alan swam directly overhead, the crocodile launched itself upward with explosive force. Its massive jaws clamped down on Alan's torso before he could react. "I've never heard a sound like the one he made," says Marcus Thompson. Alan's fellow lifeguard Woe is monitoring the radio from the main station. It came through on his waterproof radio transmitter. It was a sound of pure terror and pain. I knew immediately something terrible was happening. The attack sent shockwaves through the water that could be felt by swimmers. 20 yards away, children began crying as parents frantically pulled them from the lagoon. Teenagers who had been diving from the jumping rocks scrambled onto the shore. Their faces were white with terror. The water just exploded, remembers Robert Martinez, who had been swimming with his teenage son nearby. This massive thing came up out of nowhere, and Alan was in its jaws. My son started screaming. I just grabbed him and swam for shore as fast as I could. The crocodile immediately began its death roll, a hunting technique perfected over millions of years of evolution by spinning rapidly while maintaining its grip. The predator sought to disorient its prey and inflict maximum damage. Alan Shaw, one of the strongest swimmers on the coast, was completely helpless against the ancient killing machine. Sarah Kim, monitoring from the lifeguard station, saw the commotion and immediately activated the emergency protocols. Her voice recorded on the emergency radio system captured decals of those first crucial moments. All stations, we have an emergency at Sunset Lagoon. Lifeguard down. Repeat. Lifeguard down. Large predator in the water. Clear all swimmers immediately. But even as the emergency response began, the horror in the water continued. The crocodile surfaced, briefly giving witnesses their first clear look at the massive predator that had been living secretly in their Paradise Lagoon. Its prehistoric head was larger than a car tire. Its body was thick and powerful beyond imagination. I couldn't believe how big it was, says Jennifer Walsh, whose daughter Alan had saved 3 years earlier. It was like something from a monster movie. How had something that huge been living in the lagoon without anyone knowing? The crocodile's brief surface appearance lasted only Seconds before it dove again, it took Alan with it into the deeper water. Witnesses reported seeing massive bubbles rising to the surface and dark shapes moving beneath the water, but Alan himself was no longer visibly captain. Ray Hutchins was among the first responders to reach the scene. His fishing boat was already in the water. I immediately began racing toward the attack site while radioing for additional help. I pushed that boat ashward as it would go, Hutchins remembers, but when I got there was nothing but blood in the water. There was this massive swirl pattern that told me something huge had just gone deep. I knew we were dealing with something beyond anything we'd ever faced. Emergency responders began arriving within minutes, but the lagoon's layout made rescue attempts extremely dangerous. The deep channel where the attack had connected 2 miles of underwater caves and passages. If the Crocodile dragged Alan into that system, recovery would be virtually impossible. Marine Patrol officers arrived with sonar equipment. They were desperately scanning the depths for any sign of movement. Dive teams prepared to enter the water, but protocol demanded they wait until the predator's location could be confirmed. No one wanted to send more victims into the Crocodile's territory. We had to make impossible decisions, explains Emergency Response Coordinator Lisa Turner. Every second counted for Alan, but we couldn't risk sending divers into the water while that thing was still active. We were dealing with a predator unlike anything our people had trained for. The lagoon's transformation from paradise to nightmare was complete. Families huddled on the beach, children crying as they watched the rescue boat searching. The blood-stained water, the happy sounds of splashing and laughter, had been replaced by the harsh noise of emergency radios and helicopter rotors. Local news crews began arriving as word of the attack spread through social media. Aerial footage showed the stark contrast between the peaceful shoreline and the desperate search operation unfolding in the water. The images would later be broadcast around the world. They made Sunset Lagoon synonymous with terror rather than beauty. As the search continued, marine biologists who had rushed to the scene began analyzing the attack patterns and the predator's behavior. The evidence pointed to an ambush by an extremely large and experienced crocodile. It was an animal that had been studying its prey 4 weeks before. Striking this wasn't a random attack, explains wildlife expert Michael Torres. The animal had chosen its location, perfectly waited for the right moment, and executed a textbook predatory strike. Alan Shaw was targeted by one of nature's most efficient killing machines. The clock was ticking and Averian, involved, knew that time was running out. If Alan Shaw was still alive, somewhere in the underwater cave system, every passing minute reduced his chances of survival. But the massive predator that had claimed him was still somewhere beneath the surface. This made any rescue attempt potentially suicidal as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the lagoon. The search took on an increasingly desperate, and paradise had become hell. The Guardian, who had dedicated his life to protecting others, was now fighting for his own life against impossible odds. The Crocodile had claimed its territory with devastating effectiveness, and Alan Shaw had become its most tragic victim. Chapter 5: The Impossible Rescue. The emergency response to Alan Shaw's attack was immediate and massive, but rescuers quickly realized they were facing an unprecedented situation. Never before had a crocodile of this size attacked someone in such a popular public area. The protocols for dealing with such a scenario were virtually non-existent. Within 10 minutes of Sarakim's emergency call, the lagoon was surrounded by rescue vehicles. Coast Guard helicopters circled overhead, while Marine Patrol boats established a perimeter around the site. Emergency medical team stood ready on the shore. Their equipment was prepared for trauma that they prayed they would have. The chance to treat we through everything we had at this situation, remembers Emergency Response Coordinator Lisa Turner. But we were operating blind. No one had experience with a crocodile rescue in these conditions. We were making life and death decisions. Without a playbook, the first chilling was locating the crocodile and its victim, the lagoon's crystal clear water. Normally, its greatest asset became a curse, as the predator's thrashing had stirred up sediment from the bottom. Visibility dropped to near zero in the deep channel, where the attack had occurred. Marine patrol officers deployed high-powered sonar equipment. They were scanning the depths for any sign of movement. The readings they received were confusing and contradictory. They showed large masses moving through the underwater cave system, but no way to distinguish between the crocodile, its victim, or natural rock formations. The sonar was picking up movement all through those underwater channels. The complete picture of what was happening. We had a catastrophic failure of our safety systems, admits Regional Emergency Coordinator Lisa Turner. Multiple agencies had pieces of information that, when combined, clearly indicated a major predator threat. But those agencies weren't talking to each other. Alan's friend and fellow Lifeguard Marcus Thompson became one of the most vocal advocates for change. Following the tragedy, he worked with Lynn's family to push for comprehensive reforms in wildlife monitoring and public safety protocols. Alan Diedbeckers, the system failed him. Thompson says he was out there doing his job, protecting people, trusting that someone was protecting him. When we found out how many warning signs had been ignored, it became clear that his death could have been prevented. The crocodile itself became the subject of intensive studies. Scientists determined it was approximately 50 years old and had likely been displaced from its original territory by coastal development. The animal's size and age made it an apex predator capable of taking prey as large as adult humans. This was not an aggressive or abnormal animal, explains crocodile specialist Maria Santos. It was simply doing what millions of years of evolution had programmed it to do. When humans entered its territory, it responded as a predator. The tragedy was not the animal's behavior, but our failure to recognize the danger. The economic impact of the attack was immediate and severe. Tourism to Sunset Lagoon dropped by 90% in the months following Alan's death. Hotels, restaurants, and businesses that depended on Lagoon visitors faced massive losses as families chose safer destinations for their vacations. We went from being paradise to being the place where someone got eaten by a crocodile, explains local business owner Patricia Monroe. It didn't matter that we caught the animal or improved our safety procedures. People were terrified and they stayed away. Legal action followed swiftly. Alan's family filed wrongful death lawsuits against the lagoon management, local wildlife agencies, and regional authorities. The lawsuits alleged that negligent monitoring and inadequate safety protocols had directly contributed to the tragedy. We're not for money, Rebecca Shaw explained at the time. We're suing to force changes that will prevent other familiars from losing someone they love. Alan can't be brought back, but maybe his death can save other lives. The settlements from those lawsuits funded major improvements in wildlife monitoring technology and emergency response capabilities, advanced sonar systems, underwater cameras, and regular biological surveys become standard at swimming areas throughout the region. Most importantly, the investigation led to the creation of the Alan Shaw Early Warning System. This is a comprehensive monitoring network, tracks predator activity in public swimming areas. The system combines reports from multiple agencies, analyzes wildlife patterns, and provides real-time alerts when dangerous animals are detected. Alan's legacy is that no other family should have to go through what we went through. His mother reflects the warning signs will never be. Ignore a Dagon Because his death forced us to create systems that actually work, the captured crocodile was relocated to a specialized facility where it could live out its remaining years in a controlled environment. Scientists continue to study the animal. They are learning more about predator behavior and developing better methods for human-wildlife coexistence. But for the people who witnessed the attack, who knew Alan Shaw, or who simply understood how fragile the line between sati and danger truly is, the investigation's findings provided little comfort. They confirmed what everyone already knew, that a preventable tragedy had claimed the life of a hero. Chapter 7a. Legacy in the depths. 3 years have passed since Alan Shaw lost his life in the crystal clearer waters of Sunset Lagoon, but his legacy continues to ripple outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. The young man who dedicated his life to protecting others has, in death, become a guardian for countless future swimmers who will never know his name. The Alan Shaw Memorial Foundation, established by his family and friends, has raised over $2 million for water safety education and wildlife monitoring programs. The foundation's work extends far beyond Sunset Lagoon. It supports research and safety initiatives at swimming areas across the country. Alan always said his job was to make sure everyone got to go home safe. His mother, Rebecca Shaw, explains, while standing beside the memorial statue erected at the lagoon's entrance through the foundation, he's still doing that job, still saving lives. The foundation's most significant achievement is the implementation of the Alan Shaw Early Warning System at more than 50 public swimming areas. The sophisticated monitoring network uses underwater cameras, motion sensors, and biological tracking to detect large predator activity before it becomes a threat to human life. The system has already proven it's worth it, has prevented 2 potential attacks at other locations when large alligators were detected in popular swimming areas. In both cases, swimmers were safely evacuated and the animals relocated before any harm could occur. The technology exists to prevent tragedies like Alan's death, explains system developer Michael Torres. What was missing was the will to implement it and the funding to make it happen. Alan's legacy provided both Sunset Lagoon have slowly begun to heal from the trauma of that terrible day. New safety protocols, including mandatory wildlife surveys and emergency response drills, have restored some public confidence in the area's safety swimming scenarios based on the rescue attempts that followed his attack. Alan's death was a tragedy, but his legacy, his triumph, reflects emergency response coordinator Lisa Turner. Every life saved by better safety protocols. Every attack prevented be improved. Monitoring every child who learns to respect the water's danger stats. Alan's victory over the forces that took him as the sun sets over Sunset Lagoon, each evening casting the golden light that Alan Shaw saw on his final morning. Visitors can see his memorial statue. Silhouetted against the water, the bronze figure stands eternally vigilant, watching over the swimmers below. It's a guardian whose protection extends far beyond the boundaries of life and death. Alan Shaw's story began with a young man's dream of saving lives in the water. It ended with a hero's death that continues saving lives. Years later, in the depths of tragedy, his family and community found the strength to transform loss into legacy. They ensured that the guardian of Sunset Lagoon would never truly leave his post. The crystal clearer waters that claimed his life now flow past a memorial that promises his sacrifice will never be forgotten. Somewhere in those depths, the spirit of a hero continues to watch over the swimmers above. He ensures that paradise remains a place where familiars can safely make memories that will last a lifetime. Has resumed, though visitor numbers remain well below pre-attack levels. The lagoon's new management team, hired after the previous administration resigned in the wake of the investigation, has made transparency and safety their top priorities. Monitoring data is now publicly available online. This allows visitors to see current wildlife activity before entering the water. "We're not trying to pretend that nature isn't dangerous," explains new lagoon manager Jennifer Walsh, whose daughter was once saved by Alan Shaw. "We're trying to respect that danger and manage it responsibly. Alan taught us that the price of safety is constant vigilance." Perhaps the most moving tribute to Alan's memory is the annual Sunset Lagoon Safety Day. Hundreds of children learn water safety skills from volunteer instructors. Many of the instructors are people whose lives were saved by Alan during his years as a lifeguard. "He saved my daughter when she was 6 years old," explains volunteer instructor Robert Martinez. "Now she's 16 and teaching other kids to be safe in the water." Alan's heroism just keeps multiplying generation after generation. The massive crocodile that killed Alan Shaw died in captivity 2 years after the attack. Its death marked the end of a prehistoric life that spanned half a century. Scientists who studied the animal during its captivity learned valuable lessons about predator behavior that continued to inform safety protocols. The crocodile wasn't evil, reflects marine biologist Elena Rodriguez. It was simply following instincts programmed by millions of years of evolution. Understanding those instincts helps us predict and prevent future conflicts between humans and predators. For Alan's closest friends and family, the healing process continues slowly. His mother visits the lagoon. Every month she sits quietly on the bench installed in his armory, watching the water where her son spent his final moments. "I don't blame the water," she says softly. "Alan loved this place, loved protecting the people who came here. I think he'd want me to remember the joy he'd found here, not just tragedy." Marcus Thompson, Alan's fellow lifeguard and best friend, eventually returned to his position at the lagoon after taking a year off to recover from the trauma. He now serves as head of the safety training program that bears Alan's name. "Alan taught me that being a lifeguard isn't just a summer job," Thompson explains. "It's a sacred trust. People put their lives in your hands when they enter the water." Alan honored that trust with his life. "Now it's my job to make sure his sacrifices something." The impact of Alan Shaw's story has reached far beyond the coastal community where he lived. Indeed, his story has been featured in documentaries, safety training programs, and educational materials used around the world. Water safety instructors use his example to teach the importance of environmental awareness. Wildlife managers study the investigation findings to improve predator monitoring systems. Emergency responders train using scenarios based on the rescue attempts that followed his attack. Alan's death was a tragedy, but his legacy, his triumph, reflects emergency response coordinator Lisa Turner. "Every life saved by better safety protocols, every attack prevented by improved monitoring, every child who learns to respect the water's stats." Alan's victory over the forces that took him as the sun sets over Sunset Lagoon each evening, casting the golden light that Alan Shaw saw on his final morning. Visitors can see his memorial statue silhouetted against the water. The bronze figure stands eternally vigilant, watching over the swimmers below. It's a guardian whose protection extends far beyond the boundaries of life and death. Alan Shaw's story began with a young man's dream of saving lives in the water. It ended with a hero's death that continues saving lives years. In the depths of tragedy, his family and community found the strength to transform loss into legacy. They ensured that the guardian of Sunset Lagoon would never truly leave his post. The crystal clear waters that claim Edis's life now flow past a memorial that promises his sacrifice will never be forgotten somewhere in those depths. The spirit of a hero continues to watch over the swimmers above. He ensures that paradise remains a place where families can safely make memories that will last. A lifetime, Alan Shaw died as he lived. Protecting others, his legacy ensures that others will live because of his death in the end, perhaps. That is the greatest rescue of all scenarios, based on the rescue attempts that followed his attack, Alan's death. A tragedy, but his legacy, his triumph, reflects emergency response coordinator Lisa Turner. Every life saved by better safety protocols, every attack prevented by improved monitoring, every child who learns to respect the water's dangerous. That's Alan's victory over the forces that took him as the sun sets over Sunset Lagoon each evening, casting the golden light that Alan Shaw saw on his final morning. Visitors can see his memorial statue silhouetted against the water. The bronze figure stands eternally vigilant, watching over the swimmers below. It's a guardian whose protection extends far beyond the boundaries of life and death. Alan Shaw's story began with a young man's dream of saving lives in the water. It ended with a hero's death that continues saving lives years later. In the depths of tragedy, his family and community found the strength to transform loss into legacy. They ensured that the guardian of Sunset Lagoon would never truly leave his post. The crystal clearer waters that claimed his life now flow past a memorial that promises his sacrifice will never be forgotten. Somewhere in those depths, the spirit of a hero continues to watch over the swimmers. Above, he ensures that paradise remains a place where safely make memories that will last a lifetime.